Based on the article Stop the False Race/Gender Divide, a call to action, it states that feminism is not a homogeneous group. There are other systems of oppression. So, what discourses around feminism are you aware of, and are these discourses inclusive in regard to class, ethnicity, and race? And what alternative discourses can you come up with that create a more structured or clearly stated definition of feminism? And that is, what other groups should be considered in your alternative definition?
So growing up, I was just given that men and women should be equal as the definition for feminism. Then when I got older and I started, realizing that other communities are still oppressed, women in those communities are still oppressed, then I started to question what we're really fighting for. So I was introduced to intersectional feminism. I realized that we might just be fighting for heterosexual white cis women, and then that just didn't make sense to me. But also, when I grew up, I started realizing that there are indigenous people who are not considered in feminism, and they have a separation of their feminism because our feminism, our patriarchy has always been with us and theirs has not. We introduced patriarchy to them so they can remember a time when patriarchy was not a part of their culture, their system. So there are 3 different types of feminisms that I know. I think I really identify with intersectional, and I also want to understand more about indigenous feminism.
So for me, the first discourses I formed about feminism were based off what I learned in history class in high school and stuff. And typically what I learned about feminism then was that it was only represented by white women and their standards of feminism, and it wasn't really inclusive to the diverse groups of women that there is.
Much about feminism growing up. I always just thought it was the idea of women wanting to be equal to men, which I now realize, and even before I joined this group, I realized that it was just that's a binary idea of it, and it dismisses a lot of people. Even before joining this group, I didn't really have a concrete definition of intersectional feminism and how many different groups it includes. And I think one of the other readings, the feminism reading, talked about that, because not even all men are equal. It excludes race and all those other kinds of groups that we need to be aware of. So I think we should include more groups than just men and women being equal.
For me, when I was growing up, I actually had this idea. I didn't really believe it, that men and women were I actually believed, or I heard, that women are better than men. That was what feminism was. And all these men would be like, why are you a feminist? That's not okay. You're just doing the same exact thing. And so I was just unsure of the definition. And I think in a lot of the readings that we've had, there's not this concrete definition. So that's what makes feminism really hard. And the idea of intersectional feminism just shows the inequality, or represents the inequality in our society of race and sexuality and economic status in our lives.
I think prior to kind of my college classes that I've had about women's studies and all that, I thought of feminism as something that works towards equality of sexes, which in a way it is, but I hadn't thought about how it's missing that component, as a couple of you guys mentioned, that there are other oppressions that in other groups, that when you tell a woman that she is looking for equality with her male counterpart in her either ethnic group, racial group, and that man himself is oppressed by another system, it doesn't make sense. So it should be more inclusive, and I think that's a good way to approach it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I relate a lot to Cassidy and what Cassidy was saying, in the sense that as when I was growing up, especially in elementary school and at a younger age, I wasn't really taught about feminism so much. I was taught that there was a sense of girl power, but that girl power was specifically women are better than men or girls are better than boys. There was always this kind of divide. So I think that really pushed me and helped me like grow and understand the harms, I guess, of these differences, and how it's not about being different, it's about being equal, I suppose. And so again, with that being said, I think this relates a lot back to intersectional feminism in general, because you can't have sexism without discussing other groups that are oppressed. Now, that being said, moving on to our next question, according to the article Patriarchy, the System, patriarchy is a social hierarchy that everyone inevitably takes part in. How have these patriarchal discourses been present in your life, and what effect have they had on you? So, for me in particular, I think patriarchy is everywhere. I think it's not necessarily a good or bad thing, and I think it's important to discuss that. But at the same time, the patriarchy in general has shown up in my life in the sense that I am a girl, I identify as a girl, and I think I am looked at a certain way because of this inevitable patriarchal view that our society has.
I agree with your point, Lauren. And I think I've grown up with an idea of patriarchy as kind of what the article that we're discussing talked about at the beginning, where it's like kind of almost blaming men for it in a way, which I now realize that I was doing like not unconsciously, but without noticing. And I think it's interesting that in a way both men and women contribute to this. And I think I have seen it in my life as I like grow up assigning certain positions to certain genders, or certain activities to certain genders.
I would say patriarchy in my mind, like how I've viewed it, is just being male privilege, and that can be viewed as like blaming men for all the oppression of women. And I think it is more of something that's constructed in society by everybody, not just men. And I also, identifying as a feminist, I see it more now as challenging the patriarchy and the social hierarchy of how we have been constructed in these discourses of patriarchy in our lives.
I think for me, the idea around patriarchy that has been really prevalent has been the idea of manning up, as well as like toxic masculinity. Growing up in sports and like having an older brother, like I think it was always expected of me to just be like emotionally tough, or like an emotional stonewall, not really being able to express my emotions. But I was also raised around a lot of women, and not that this is an idea that only pertains to women, but I'm also a very emotional person, and like I cried a lot as a kid and all those things. And I think the idea of patriarchy pushed me to feel like, oh, I can't do those things. I can't be emotional. I can't cry. And I expected to take the lead on things and just be like the outspoken person, just because I identify as a man. And it's definitely messed with my head a little bit, and definitely made me very insecure. But the more I learn, the more comfortable I feel in not just pertaining to toxic masculinity and being that stereotypical man.
How I've seen the patriarchy growing up is that like I've like always thought that women were seen as like the second best, like after men, and therefore like the qualities that like women like traditionally like demonstrate are like second to like the masculine qualities that men show. And the way that it has been present in my life is in terms of like politics and the way like the whole society is constructed. So I know that my life has been controlled by like the laws that like men primarily like vote for. And I was also raised in like the Mexican culture, which is like very patriarchal. So like my life has like consisted of like men trying to control like most aspects of my life.
Growing up, I was kind of in a bubble, a very open-minded bubble. So when I kind of reached the outside world, I was very confused and I was kind of hurt by it. I did experience this. I was a captain of my robotics team in high school, as well as president of several other clubs, but robotics was the bigger one because we were funded and sponsored by SpaceX. So I spent a lot of time at the SpaceX facilities in Hawthorne working with engineers. And I just got this sense of, they treated me like, oh, like you're a woman, you can do big things. They were trying to push this, like, I am amazing. And it was almost as if they were guilty. And I know I talk to a lot of men who feel like, you can't blame me for my privilege. And I talk to a lot of white people who say, you can't blame me for my privilege. And I said, no, I'm not blaming you. Like, that is not your fault. You just happen to have it. It's this system.
Right, and so our last question is, in Night to His Day, it is stated that gender lets people know what to expect from others. So have you ever pushed gender binaries on someone, and has anyone ever pushed them onto you? As well as what meso or macro influences did these gender binaries perpetuate?
I guess when I was little, I was, I guess, growing up with, these are boys' toys, boys like blue, girls like pink. I was like super little. I can watch home videos and see myself saying, I don't want that. That's for boys. I'm not a boy. What are you doing? And to this day, I kind of feel kind of heartbroken that I thought like that. Then growing up, I was more into the boy things. And I would give my brother, the High School Musical stuff for Christmas, and I would get all the Cars stuff, and he would just be stuck with High School Musical, and he'll look at it like, what am I supposed to do with this? I said, I don't know, I don't want it. So then it kind of turned into more like, I want to be a boy. I went to a lot of therapy. They asked me if I was transgender. I said, no, I don't think so. And I knew what it was at a very young age because my mom's a psychologist. But I was like, no, I don't think so. I just know I want to be a boy. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized that I liked how boys were treated. They were treated way better. They were given these privileges that I wanted. So I think that was a pretty rough period of time. It went on for a few years, and my mom would always check up on me like, hey, like, how you feeling? Still want to be a boy? Nothing has changed, until one day it did change. I was like, you know what? I'm proud to be a woman. And instead of trying to give up and go to the other side, I want to fight for all women. Anyone who identifies as women, anyone who identifies as anything other, I think I just wanted to fight against the patriarchy in general, and kind of open it up to other, people that are oppressed.
Growing up, my family has like pushed the gender binaries on me just through like traditional like gender roles at home, like cleaning. And they have also like encouraged me to like dress modestly, and like they would just like do my hair how like girls are typically like dressed. And then I would also like show like some characteristics of like being a tomboy, and like my family members sometimes like reacted negatively to that. Like my sisters would be like, oh, only boys do that, or like even just like in middle school and high school they would be like, oh, like why don't you dress more girly? And like that's something that like still influences me, because I'm like, oh, I'm not being girly enough, or I'm like wearing jeans again, like is that okay? And then I have like pushed the gender binary on like my little brothers like growing up, because like when it came to like house chores and stuff like that, I would like tell my parents that my brothers should be doing like the dirty work because I'm the girl.
I
And
think
then
more with Giselle's. My story's a little more interrelated to that. I too like was pushed all these like feminine toys and all that. And I also like with my siblings feel like responsible for having put these ideas into their maybe like social locations, that they should behave a certain way, or that they should like certain things because they are either male or female. And like Cassidy, though, I'm trying to move away too from doing that in my life.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I have definitely, as much as I hate to admit it, at least thought about the gender binary. And when I see certain things, I'm like, isn't that for a boy? Isn't that for a girl? I will say, as I've grown up, as I've educated myself, as I've learned more, I've gotten further and further away from holding those discourses around certain things. I'm a huge baseball fan, and the Marlins just hired their first female general manager, which is huge. And I think under normal circumstances, normal meaning when I was younger, in the discourses I grew up with, I would have been like, well, why? Like, she's a girl, she's not supposed to be a GM. Whereas now, as I've grown and I've learned, I'm like, wow, this is a huge step forward, I feel like, in the sense of equality in terms of gender binaries. I think also they've definitely been pushed onto me in the sense that I identify as female, and I've always played sports my entire life, and it's just a huge aspect there in the sense of women being compared to men in this strict, especially women and men, especially regarding the binary. Are women capable enough? Men are stronger. These very black and white discourses that are not necessarily inclusive. And I think that can be said for not only sports, but almost anywhere you look. That concludes our discussion. Thank you so much for listening.